my life I've felt that long before we saw how pressing the climate crisis is, which simply adds to my philosophical reasons for believing in what I believe, which are that individuation is very important, that it is the differences between places and people and so on that are life-giving and vital, and that creating a general uniformity is simply wrong. It's imposing the same sort of rules across different contexts. And I've always thought that context is fantastically important. And of course, the context in which we live is our home, the people with whom we bond, and the place that is our nest, if you like. And it turns out that mammals actually bond with their nests as much as they do with their mothers. So I've always had this belief that what is local to us, what is familiar, what is the place where we belong, really important point, is what needs to be preserved against the forces of conformity, generalization, and decontextualization. So that's the sort of background to that. And then I think before it became particularly fashionable, as it were, I kept thinking as a young man, or as a teenager, all I see is the destruction of beautiful places going on apace, but I had no idea how fast it was going to go on. And so that reinforced it. And then, of course, there comes the very obvious evidence that the business of pretending that we can do one thing across the globe is hugely damaging. It creates an enormous amount of money and concentrates it in the hands of a few people, but actually disempowers and destroys the local. I think it's something we're all now aware of, that there is a massive increase in mental illness. Even if not formally anxiety and depression, but a general discontent. Very few people feel grounded and happy with their lives now. And this is not surprising, because there are three things that give meaning and fulfillment to human life, above all. One is belonging to a stable, secure community in which you feel you belong, where you know you can trust, where you share values, where you can open your doors to people and share your lives with them. The second is the relationship with the natural world, which is something so profound that we reconstitute it in our left hemisphere dominated way as saving the environment. But this is not what I'm talking about. I mean, sure, destruction of the environment is essential to reverse. But what I'm talking about is nature as where we belong as much as any other kind of home. And we are parts of it, we are expressions of it for a while, and then we return to it. So we are nature as much as anything else. And what that tells us is that we're profoundly connected to nature. And nature reminds us of many things that otherwise our books and discourse wouldn't tell us, such as that there's many things here that we don't fully understand, not only that we can't control, but it would be better if we didn't control. That there is beauty and complexity there, not just mechanical systems. So all of this is enormously important. It reconnects us to the flow of unconscious and conscious experience, and beyond that to something in the face of which we must feel humble. And I think the third one is the relationship with the divine, which is, I'm coming to believe more and more, is the single most important thing. And that if we're to save whatever it is we find is precious to us, we cannot do it without a resacralization, a sense of all that is awe-inspiring, and before which we should remain humble and modest. And that has gone out, and it would also induce compassion. So we've got lives in which we're not compassionate. We're being pitched one against another artificially, partly by the system of capitalism, which is all about competition, and partly by social media, which thrives on polarization. And we've been uprooted in an extraordinary way from our natural environment. Until 1800, 99.9% of the population of the world would live in intimate contact with nature every day. But now perhaps only half the planet does. And if you really wanted to destroy people's happiness and confidence, you tell them that the spiritual was just something that only naive people and people who were properly educated could possibly give any credence to. And of course, you set about, as capitalism does, and fractionalism, which is unfortunately being driven by social media, all kinds of things that weren't particularly contested and where we lived happily with one another for a long time. Now we've got people pitched against one another, which is really very sad. So the outcome is inevitably a sense of deep insecurity, existential angst. What am I? Where am I? What is the world? And it's that my work aims to address. I want to to liberate people really into trusting, and this is what people tell me, trusting their beliefs and intuitions, that there's more to this than is accounted for in the system of reductionist materialism. We all have this experience of the sublime, that in a sublime landscape, before a truly sublime work of art or listening to sublime music, one is aware not of being overpowered by its greatness, but taken up into its greatness, because after all, we are not separate from it. It is revealing something about us that was before only implicit, but it unpacks it, it unfolds it, it brings it into our awareness. And one of the good things about a spiritual tradition, and I'm loath to use the word religion because, of course, a lot of people are allergic to that idea for very good reasons, but without beating about the bush, religious traditions often do, with all their failings, make a part of our regular lives things that otherwise we might forget and put out of mind. So little habits of giving thanks for things, for praying for things, for singing together, worshipping together. These things bring into our minds again an awareness of something both beautiful and good that is much bigger than all the forces we see around us that are pushing us to buy or to become part of a group. And that is so destructive. So yes, the sublime has been misconceived as something that humiliates us, but it doesn't humiliate us. It renders us humble before something to which we are connected and for which we can only be grateful. Whatever we achieve, if we achieve it according to the kind of thinking that got us into this mess, it won't help, because as Einstein said, we can't get out of the mess that this thinking has created using the same thinking. And what I worry about is that quite a lot of the effort to improve the situation is poured into vast bureaucracies, administration, technology, and all the things that, as you say, reify the abstracting, decontextualizing, categorizing, isolating, devivifying way of the left hemisphere. So I think the first thing to say is that we need to incorporate into our own lives. And people say, what can I do? I feel so helpless. But that's because they're thinking in terms of size as the left hemisphere thinks of it, which is, here am I, this small person, and there's this vast Earth, and then there's an infinitely vaster cosmos, which means that none of this means anything. In fact, if you see with a different eye, you see not only that it does very much mean something and that we're connected to it, but also that our role is not so insignificant, that we're not asked to solve infinite problems. We're asked to lead the best lives that we can. And that does not mean turning ourselves into machines. In fact, exactly the opposite. So the tendency to try and improve our cognition through AI is, in my view, a mistake. I don't want my cognition improving. I want being a better person, and no machine's going to help me do that. So I think, starting from home, starting from yourself, and then moving out to your local community is a very sensible way to go. I'm not saying there aren't also broad top-down things that need to be achieved, but they must be achieved within that context of a mentality which is, broadly speaking, that in which the right hemisphere is in control. Because the right hemisphere simply sees more, is more intelligent. And I don't mean just emotionally and socially, I mean cognitively more intelligent. It is our wisdom, if you like, and we're neglecting it because of something that will help us amass stuff and become powerful. But to what end? I think we can reground ourselves, and it's not terribly difficult, actually. I think there's an aspect in which negation is enormously positive. It's one of the chief, if not the chief, piece of wisdom that comes out of China and Japan, which is that not doing and not thinking things is as important as thinking and doing. So one of the first things to do, and this is often true of psychiatric patients, is how do I change? Well, the first thing is you know that what you're doing now is not working. So let's examine what you are doing now, what you are thinking now, and stop doing some of those things and see what emerges. Because the great thing is, creativity is not something one makes happen. You know, there are seminars where I want to become more creative and so on. Well, good luck. But one of the ways of doing it is stop doing many of the things you're doing now. Be peaceful and quiet and open. And in that silence, if you're truly attentive, things will come to you. Not things will somehow be generated by your talkative brain, but they will come through you. They may come out of you, but in my view, we're all connected anyway, so they come through us, yes. And so part of the thing is to stop doing many of the things that we think are advantageous, to be self-critical, scrutinize some of the points of view that we have, often very good to turn them on their heads. So a thing I learnt in my teens from some of my teachers was, yes, that's the accepted wisdom, but try turning that upside down and see what comes of it. And almost always something very important that was being neglected came out of it. So I think that's one aspect. But the other is simply to trust, to be silent, to be open, to be peacefully aware. Vigilant is a good word, but vigilant nowadays makes us think on the lookout all the time. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is sort of not cutting off 99.9% of everything that one's in contact with. And through that, I think one can reach a place where something positive and generative comes to us and guides our actions. So it's always a sort of two-way process. There's nothing that just goes one way. There's no relationship that can be one way. So our relationship with whatever it is we call reality is such that we influence that reality, and that reality influences us. And if we are properly attentive, then this is a discourse, a reciprocal relationship that will be fruitful and generative. Well, coming back to the relationship between the Master and his emissary, my point is not that the emissary, the left hemisphere, is of no value. It's of great value as long as it remains the servant of the Master, doesn't pretend to be the Master, because that's where chaos lies. Because it literally knows less, and as we know, those who know less think they know more, and those who know more think they know less. So people sometimes say to me, your book is a very left hemisphere exercise in that you use reason and science and so on to substantiate your argument. But maybe that's an example of using the emissary's tools. But what I would say to that is that, well, first of all, I would say that it's a misconception to think that reason and science are purely a left hemisphere phenomenon. All the most important parts of both reason, not just rationalization, which is a very left hemisphere thing, but true reason and science draw as much, if not more, from the right hemisphere. But the other thing I'd say is, it's no good standing on one mountain peak and shouting to somebody on another one, saying, come here. What you need to do is to go to where they are and bring them with you. And I use that metaphor in a way at the opening of The Matter of Things, my latest book, that I'm not trying to persuade people by an argument, because if they don't see what I see, they will never be persuaded. But I want to, in fact, take them on a journey, which I hope will be pleasurable, in which we start to see the landscape in a different way, and that you then help them to see things that they didn't otherwise see. Loads of people write to me and say, you know, what you've done is you've opened my eyes to things that I could never understand, but at some level I knew it was right.
Yeah.
And so I think I succeeded in that, not by being left hemispheric, but by not neglecting the uses of the left hemisphere to help people to a place where they can use more powerfully the wisdom that comes from the right hemisphere and from both. I mean, it's a relationship, and it shouldn't be thought of as, the trouble is we always think when there are two things, one of them's going to be right and the other one's going to be wrong. It's not like that. Both of them have their worth, but it's just that one of them thinks it can do everything and it can't. I believe that the planet local movement is extremely important, that it doesn't pretend to be the whole answer to all our problems, but it is an essential part of moving towards a saner future and a saner world.